Hey, it's the Arvind and Mike show. He's an education investor and I'm an education entrepreneur. We are both dads to two kids. He's a Carolina Tar Heel with Indian parents, whereas I am a Duke Blue Devil with Jewish parents. All of which meaning there are 4 retirees out there disappointed that neither of us became doctors. Here we go. Arvind, I have a kid story.
Do you?
So I went for a walk with the dog today. That was going to be a 90-minute walk. And the kids get home from school during the time when I'm out walking. To avoid any worry on Daphne's part that the dog was missing, I wrote a note, not on a Post-it, Arvind.
Yeah.
But I wrote a note on a full 8x11 piece of paper and I taped it prominently to the floor where it could not be missed, where it says, "I've taken Mike for a walk, love Grizzly." I get a panic call during my walk. It's Daphne. "Where's Grizzly? He's missing." So I'm like, he's right with me. And when I get home, I'm like, we reconstruct what happened. So it turned out she looked in, when she got home to the front door, the dog was not barking excitedly to greet her. She looks in the window from the front door and doesn't see him, also unusual. She walks in and takes an immediate right turn towards his crate. He's not there. She then walks all the way around through the kitchen, up the stairs, thereby missing my prominent note.
Yeah.
Then she panics. Question. In hindsight, is that a good thing that she got an at-bat of feeling panicked and then it turned out okay?
As opposed to?
Let's say instead of writing a note and taping it to the floor, I had made a 10-foot poster that said, "The dog is with me, don't worry."
Yeah.
You know, you can always do more to protect your kid, right?
Right.
But maybe sometimes these accidents are really good for building their resilience.
Absolutely. I truly believe that any setback that doesn't have permanent consequences is a good setback for kids.
Yeah, I'm with you, buddy. All right, well, speaking of setbacks, man, you managed to pile up a whole bunch of them as an investor.
Yeah.
And you learned a lot of lessons the hard way.
Yep.
But not enough pain to scare you off investing. In fact, you plan to do some investing with your own money. Let's start with what you've done in the past. Tell me a little about the Zaya story.
Yeah, so I started as my first time being an investor was as a summer intern. So I joined this really fledgling corporate venture capital fund that was just getting off the ground called the Pearson Affordable Learning Fund, which was part of the world's largest education company, Pearson, but was this tiny fund that was looking to invest in education companies in Asia and Africa.
Okay, so Pearson's huge textbook billion-dollar company, struggling because people don't like textbooks anymore, blah, 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 testing, getting less popular. And they're like, hey, let's set up a fund. Maybe they can figure out what our next business is going to be.
Yeah, exactly. And so I joined this fund as a summer intern and spent the summer in India. And I had the way in which I got this job was this internship was I had written a paper about what I thought was the solution to ed tech problems in emerging markets. And in writing that paper, I had interviewed the founder of the Pearson Affordable Learning Fund, and Caitlin Donnelly.
Right. So Caitlin's like, "You're smart. I would like to hire you as a summer intern."
Exactly. So I head to India. I meet this guy, Neil D'Souza, and he had started this company called Zaya. And it was essentially this box that could host a lot of content on the box itself, create a local network for devices to connect, and distribute that content. And what was crazy was that was kind of the solution that I had written in my paper for what was the solution to education in developing countries.
Wait, just to simplify, because you say box, does that mean if all these schools that aren't connected to the internet, and what Zaya was saying is we can create a solution for those schools that have...
Well, it's not even that you're not connected to the internet. Even if you technically have an internet connection, you don't have the speed to be able to actually...
Yeah, you have a crappy internet connection.
Crappy, exactly.
It's a solution for crappy... In most countries, especially at that time you were doing it,
yes,
connectivity was a huge problem. And so, of course, ed tech wasn't working because frigging, just to load something took forever.
Exactly. So if you can localize it on one device, create a local hotspot for those the potential tablets that are connecting to it. At that time, tablets were getting very low cost in India, so the possibility of making that
right, the hardware is cheap. This this thing a kid could hold of a tablet.
Yes.
The cheapo tablet that's like way different from like an Apple tablet, but it
Exactly.
sort of worked, except it needed essentially to be able to like connect to something.
Yep.
And you sort of had the solution in your mind, and then you met this guy named Neil, and he had already built the solution that was in your mind, and you're like,
yeah, former Cisco engineer, wicked smart.
Credible. Yes.
I fell into the obvious trap.
What's the obvious trap?
Which is because it validated my own beliefs.
You ate your own
was
cooking.
All in.
You ate your own cooking.
Yes. So I went all in super quick, and it was just so easy. And I learned for a business that's primarily built around ed tech, it's so easy to create a spreadsheet unicorn. You just create a couple changes to the assumptions around how fast the growth is, and boom, everything makes sense.
Right, no, so spreadsheet unicorn you're saying is like, you're sort of saying, hey, if sales are this and our costs are this, and you're sort of playing around because you have no idea.
You have no idea.
And then you start playing with particularly the sales, like how much we're going to sell. And
Yes.
You notice that the higher you make that number, the more, like the closer to a billionaire you will one day be, because this business looks incredible.
Absolutely.
And so,
because, I'm used to businesses that are very fundamental. A school, the cost structure is so well known. I can analyze it. With something like this, there's just not much. Everything is fixed cost related.
Yes.
The variable costs are so low other than the cost of selling itself.
Yes,
And
right.
You just imagine that selling this is just going to become easier and easier.
Right, if you figure out a box that like 100,000 schools want to buy, and you put that into this, we're going to sell 100,000 of these, you're going to have a very profitable business proposition to show an investor you were
Yes.
that investor. So
Yes.
what happened then? Did you get the Affordable Learning Fund to write a check to Zaya?
Yes. So that's where, that's it kind of, I think, is a reason why, on one hand, it showed that I have a skill as an investor, because investing is also about relationships.
Yes.
And I convinced Neil to take a check from a summer intern over other potential suitors.
Why did he do that? Why, in other words, what you're saying is you're a nobody, and Pearson, while a big name, wasn't yet sort of in that space.
Yeah.
And why would he sort of turn down the bigger dog for the smaller dog?
Ultimately, you'd have to ask him, but I think it is about the relationship.
Yes, that's what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah, you got to know him a little bit, had a couple beers or whatever you had.
Yeah, got to know him. And because I had been thinking about this idea, I'm asking a lot of thoughtful questions. I'm really seem intrinsically motivated about the potential of the business, and that can be exciting to someone who's trying to build something so grandiose, so ambitious.
So you invest in this thing, and looking back,
yeah,
because you talked at the top about you learned some lessons the hard way.
Yeah.
And then you sort of said, well, maybe I fell in love with the idea in part because I sort of had a similar idea. In hindsight, what would today's Arvind tell younger Arvind if you sort of did the let's go back in time? If you went back in time, what would you say as you were saying, no, I want to greenlight this investment?
I would still want to make the investment.
Yeah.
But I would want to be a better critical thinker about the challenges to scaling that investment.
Yeah.
And I'd want to have those critical conversations earlier on with him. Instead of just being a kind of unvarnished supporter.
Right.
I had rose tinted glasses in terms of how I was looking at it.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, I think that's something you have to have the right team in place if you're going to make any business really work.
I think you're hitting on it's something that's plagued me in my career, and as I've gotten to know investors, they all become more sophisticated, exactly like you, about the following problem, which is there's a type of person like Neil, arguably like me in certain nerdy contexts, that is an inventor. They're good at a better mousetrap. But what they missed, certainly what I missed for a big part of my career, is better mousetrap is maybe 25% of the challenge of creating a successful, thriving enterprise, whether it's a profit or a nonprofit. And, whereas I think instinctively you think a better mousetrap, like, oh, if I build a much better way for schools to use ed tech in India, that's 90% of the problem, and the sales part, if you will, is 10%, when it's possibly even backwards. And that just comes up over and over. Again, experienced investors, they look at team, like the whole team. That's what we were sort of saying about Zaya, not just the inventor or the technical side.
Yep.
And in fact, my experience with Bridge is I sort of became the chief academic officer, their first one, 4 years after they started, because I think Jay and Shannon had the cause and effect. Right? First, let's build something that's good enough that Kenyan parents seem to want. Then we can spend our limited dollars to make a much better mousetrap. Instead of focusing on the mousetrap first. That's a great point. Let's fly, I'm guessing, 5,000 miles southwest from India to South Africa.
Yeah.
For another investment experience you had with Spark Schools.
It's funny because Spark Schools is this, it was started by a woman named Stacy Brewer and a guy named Ryan Harrison, who they had met in business school, and this had been like a business school plan of theirs, and they were creating a network of high quality schools at a lower price point. So at typically in South African education, the private schools the good elite private schools were charging anywhere from kind of $3,000 upwards, but some of them upwards of $10,000. And they were trying to charge $1,000 and reach a new segment of aspiring. They were trying to open up private schools to a new audience and not compromise on quality. They were adopting a lot of the practices from Rocket Ship, a successful set of charter schools in the US, and we're trying to apply some of these blended learning, flipped classroom, master teacher models that they could employ in this to essentially be profitable. And I actually advocated not making this investment, even though we ended up making the investment, and it ended up being one of the more successful investments our fund made. They had a pretty successful growth trajectory. They were covered in The Economist. They're still very rapidly growing, and it's been a really exciting story to be a part of. I had the pleasure of visiting their schools, and they have this thing called Sparks Fly, which is their morning assembly.
Yes.
And it was one of the most magical experiences I've ever had in a school.
Yes.
Everyone is singing songs, they're celebrating, they're talking about their plans for university, and it just makes you excited to be in the education space when you get to see moments like that.
Yes. I will say, just to that point, I remember the first few days of our little match charter school, and remember, like, the guy really running it, who I'd hired, Charlie Spizzato, was this great people person and a 35-year veteran educator and teacher of the year and all these amazing things. And he understood the power of ritual.
Yes.
And I did not. I was like, wait, I don't understand. Why are you greeting every single kid every single day at the door with a handshake and asking them, like, why are you here? To learn. What does it take? Courage, discipline, and perseverance. And I can walk in Boston and have kids come up to me now, 20 years later.
Yeah.
And of course, as you know, through what you're talking about when sparks fly, the rituals that genuinely have meaning to kids that really work.
Yeah.
That is what they remember most.
Yep.
And it's so powerful. And yet I was like, well, in grad school at Harvard, we talked about math curriculum and we talked about teacher training, but I don't know that we talked about like exactly the detail of what is your weekly assembly like? And is it blah and stupid, or is it like, wow, like spark?
Absolutely. Let me give you a quick tangent here on a parenting note. I've adopted some of these ritual ideas, and I've taken a ritual from the Michigan football coach, Jim Harbaugh.
What, you guys all wear khakis?
Yeah. He has this phrase, and I use it with my kids. So when I drop them off in the mornings, I say to them, who's got it better than us? And they both yell, nobody.
Oh, that's so great. Oh my God. I love your ritual. Oh, that is genius. That is really good. That's got to feel good too. It feels it's good. When your kids say nobody, it makes you feel like the sparks fly.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, here's another tangent for you on that story. So you mentioned that the Spark schools in South Africa, have a blended learning model, which they adapted at the beginning from the Rocket Ship network of charter schools in California.
Yes.
to their great credit, Rocket Ship realized they were actually struggling with their blended learning model, and they changed the model quite a bit and reduced the blendedness of it.
Yes.
And so it's funny how these things flow. Like, you might copy from one,
Yes.
but then they become something else, and now maybe you're the leader in blended learning.
And that's one thing you always underestimate with innovators is the best innovators aren't tied to the innovation itself. It's to the process of innovation. So it's like when I talked to Bailey, who was the chief academic officer at Spark, it's like she's so excited to talk about all the things they're not getting right. And I'm just like, this is awesome. It was such a pleasure to talk to someone they're so motivated on finding what's not working here and what can we change. And that's always something I find really, the more innovative people are, they tend to be more open to continually changing.
Yes. My quick MBA tangent here is Preston, who's the founder and CEO to this day of Rocket Ship. I ran into him at a conference, and I had not brought any athletic gear, but we decided, a few of us, to play some 3-on-3 basketball. And Arvind, it was like one of the top 5 games I've ever had of shot making. Like everything I put up was going in. It was insane. That's why I remember, and I remember how now Preston has this, he thinks of me as like almost like a, nearly collegiate level basketball player, because it was insane what I was doing out there. And nothing could be further from the truth. Like on a bell curve distribution, we were as far to the right as you could possibly be.
Yeah.
But I love that guy, and I always want to run into him because he thinks of me differently than everybody else who actually knows me.
Well, you always want to run into him, but you never want to play basketball with him again.
I never want to play basketball with him again.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to just to keep believing the dream. So let's go back. What do you got on Spark?
The reason I advocated against the investment was almost the flip problem of Zaya, which was Spark was trying to build schools, and new schools, everything about that was something I could analyze in a spreadsheet. So I could take everything in their model, benchmark all their costs, do all the sensitivity analysis, and I was like, look, if everything goes right, this is going to be pretty good. But look at this, can go wrong, this can go wrong, this can go wrong, and this cost assumption might not hold. It was so easy to poke holes from a financial standpoint that I lost sight of the fact that there was an excellent team. I just lost sight of the bigger picture.
Yes, it's real. Schools are an unusual thing if you think of them as a business, if you think about a private school, because if you're able to get a first cohort of parents to cross the chasm and trust you, and you sort of can hit your targets in year 1, you're really, really well positioned, because if those parents are genuinely happy, they're going to tell other parents, and you're just kind of going to win on word of mouth. But a lot of private schools die.
Yeah.
In that year 0, because the parents look around and they're like, well, where are the other parents? And there's sort of this chicken and egg thing of getting it going.
And especially if you're trying to be at a new price point, you're not just taking that enrollment hurdle on, but you're also taking the hurdle on of, does your cost structure work? Because you're not doing the similar, you're not at the same price point as everyone else. So the money coming in is lower. So how are you doing what you're doing in the right ways? You have, all that has to be validated.
Right. And I don't think people understand that, like in the US, if you sort of look, let's say, at private schools in, big city, Boston or New York, whatever, there's like the $50,000 private schools. There's the $5,000 to $10,000 Catholic schools, if we're talking elementaries, and then a few different price points in between. But there's sort of a range of 10x, if you will, from cheap to expensive. But in the developing world, in Kenya, there's $30,000 or $40,000 a year US elementaries for like rich people. There are $100 a year schools like Bridge and a ton of other ones.
Yep.
The public schools actually often cost like $100 a year too, right? Because they're like, people don't realize they're not free. They charge for the books, and they charge a desk fee, and they charge an exam fee, and they charge a uniform fee, and you have to wear the uniform and so forth. So like a school like Spark or Nova in Nova Pioneer, schools for $1,000 or $3,000, that was sort of like creating a new category for like emerging middle class, but definitely not super rich.
Yeah.
So they just have more levels, I guess I would say.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, to me, those two, the Zaya and Spark experiences kind of helped me kind of build my self-awareness as an investor, which was, look, I can't, where there's a concrete business model, I know how to do that analysis, but I need to do that in the context of not forgetting looking at some of the big picture opportunities and who's driving the ship. And where there's a less concrete business model, I can't forget about the critical analysis because it's not as easily achieved.
Yep. Okay. So Prue and I watched a movie 2 weeks ago called 3 Idiots, and it's a Bollywood movie about 3 kind of fun guys who go to a college in India, like an engineering college that's sort of like, an RPI or maybe not quite MIT, but like that type of engineering school. And there are presumably a lot of kids whose families in India really want them to go to a college like this, a really strict, ambitious engineering college because it sets up good jobs.
Yeah.
You made an investment, I think, in that space. Is that correct?
That's right. In a company called Avanti. Essentially, they had adopted a flipped classroom model and a very specific pedagogical format.
Okay, so let me just make sure I understand. So basically, first of all, there's an idea and then there's whatever these guys were selling or creating. But the idea is that instead of a regular class where the professor says, listen, let me explain this stuff to you. And then after a while, it's like, okay, go do some problems or something, like go practice it. The flipped classroom is what? Is the idea that first you struggle with the material and then at the end it sort of all comes together?
Yeah, the idea is you read the material. Essentially, in a typical classroom, you spend time covering the material of the textbook, and then I send you home with problems to work on.
Yep.
Here in a flipped classroom, we're doing the reverse. You spend time just reading the textbook material on your own, watching videos of whatever that content is. And when you come into class, we're doing the problems. So that the entire time of our time together is revolving around the problems themselves.
Right. So the flip is the problem is no longer homework for yourself. It's now the main course.
Yes.
During the class time. And so what was the product, if you will, that allowed this type of teaching? What were these guys selling?
So they were essentially selling usually this. So the structure in this engineering, as that movie 3 Idiots outlined, the structure is there's this one exam called the IIT JEE examination that is the gateway to getting into engineering college in India. So your score on that exam determines what college you can get into and what major you can take within that college. So it's as high stakes an exam as you can get.
It's like SAT on steroids if there were literally nothing else. No GPA,
nothing else. Yes.
No essay, no recommendations, no nothing. It's like, what'd you score on your test? That's it. We're done.
Absolutely. And except if the SAT were 100 times harder and there were 1 million people taking it.
Yes.
And so that's the context in India. And so there's this huge test prep business, but it's mostly around star tutors. So someone who's done exceptionally well on this exam, who's been teaching it has a proven track record of teaching. They charge exuberant sums for people to get that training and do better on this exam. Avanti's model was to say, let's take lower cost people, recent college grads themselves who don't have the teaching experience. We'll provide a curriculum that is deployed and with this flipped classroom pedagogy and with this specifically designed question set, we can get similar results to a star tutor. So we can essentially reach at a much lower price point. We can be very effective in delivering world-class tutoring for this exam.
Yes. And so how'd it go?
It is a mixed bag. So it hasn't been a stunning success. It hasn't been a failure either. It's still a business that is still, slowly, it's on a linear growth path. And, it's been frustrating because there have been other businesses within this space that have grown, in India at the same time frame that have grown more exponentially. And, so that can be frustrating. And I think that the team that we invested in is an amazing team. So the 2 founders and the people they were able to, if those 2 founders were starting a shoe shining business, I would say, send me the plan, I'll take a look, because they're just very, they check all the boxes. They're, they complement each other well. They're, they have all the things you look for in a founding team, the ability to recruit talent, strategically smart, have the ability to execute. They also are, they're also very good people. And they have, in parallel to building their for-profit arm, they were building a nonprofit arm that was trying to create government partnerships to reach even lower income students than they were able to at their price point. And it just called to mind to me really thinking about aligning goals as an investor and as a team, who, as a company, whatever that is. Because we tend to measure things in purely monetary terms. And it's not always the case that everyone is measuring on that same monetary benchmark.
Yeah, you end up with these things in the investment world, and I think it's reason some people just don't want to invest in education that are in a whole bunch of other consumer services and products. I think for most investors, the obvious goal there is getting a return on their investment.
Yeah.
And they make a very sharp distinction between their investing work and their philanthropy. In fact, on the TV show Shark Tank last week, that came up with one of the teams pitching for an investment. And Kevin O'Leary was like, I don't trust that you're really clearly trying to maximize my return on capital. And, he said, I've put donations into 15 different philanthropies this year, but that's all my choice with my earning. I always worry about these blended businesses, these double bottom line businesses, because it's hard for me to be clear on, are we really aligned? I want you to be 100% about creating the largest possible return. And if you give me back my money and then some, let me worry about what kind of social good I want to do with it. And so, right, it gets complicated with the double bottom line. People like to say, oh, there's no conflict there. Double bottom line is always good, or somehow it even increases your monetary profits, but there's some trade-off. It seems like you're alluding to that a little bit.
A business like Avanti is doing amazing things. Like they had a kid that got into MIT on a full ride through their program, son of a mechanic in a second tier city in India that does well on this exam, but then gets exposed to this program and, starts opening his eyes to other possibilities, gets accepted on a full ride to MIT. And I've had a couple meals with him, and he is incredible. And you just think that, and he really does credit Avanti's program, not just for his preparation, but for opening, the fact that it was a 22-year-old recent grad who he could connect with, and, was someone who took an interest in him coming back to this tutoring model where they created a relationship. It opened the world to him. And those are the types of things that as an investing community, we have to think more creatively about how we support the path of companies that are doing the right thing and doing it well. They may not be the dramatic financial success, but they're not financially failing either. And so there has to be a way there has to be better ways to kind of capture that upside in the right way.
Yeah, I mean, there's it's almost like you're talking about a whole asset class, right? Like, the non-VC scalable, this will return 20x on your money, but it might be a very good business with, great quality to it, right?
Yeah.
And right now, there are interesting efforts where people say, the average Joe can't invest into a venture capital fund, but we'll democratize that asset class. We will, allow you to put $500 into some biotech startup or something like that. Yeah. You could imagine a version where somebody comes along and sort of describes the type of businesses you're talking about and says, hey, like, you could put $500 into a company like Avanti that is not promising to become like a publicly traded billion-dollar company, but could do pretty well and return you good return on your money.
Yeah, exactly.
So let me ask you this. You invested in these three things.
Yeah. You've
since done some other investments in other contexts, in schools. You did your own little startup in India.
Startup would be a charitable word to use.
Okay, what did you do?
So while I was at this summer intern in India scouting these investments, I somehow at the same time, I had gotten funding from this organization called D Prize to test out this idea that I was really interested in. And so the idea was, I felt like another major issue that could be solved in India was like, there's all these low-cost private schools, there's these government schools, there is actually a lot of choice for parents. But what do they really have? What information do they have to make that choice?
Yeah.
And usually it's like they can see the facilities, they know if they can speak English.
Yep. They know if the teachers can speak English, right? That's very important to the families.
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
And so they're saying they're making these decisions on imperfect information. So I'm thinking, what if we could get them better information on what's happening in the classroom to help them make better decisions? Wouldn't that disrupt the entire incentive structure for the low-cost private school space? Instead of them saying, let me have a fancy facility and put like an English brochure together or make sure my head of school, they would actually say, let's make sure we train the teacher, let's make sure we perform on metrics that would get me enrollment. Because if they saw that parents had access to that information, I imagine that the market would really respond.
Right. So just to be clear, the problem to solve is that the way parents choose private schools is like entirely on fakery. It's like, how nice does this place look?
Yes.
One, they're looking for some kind of whatever. In that particular case, they're looking, because they're not themselves often English speakers, they're looking for like teachers who can like teach in the language of English or know English. That matters a lot. And then often they're obviously looking at the other kids. Like, I want my kids to go to school with other kids that I look up to, so they're looking at the other families. And so people like you and me that care a lot about teaching quality,
yeah,
we're just always exasperated because the parents have no idea what education, the teaching quality is really like. They're always looking for these external markers and other kids that seem like their kids. And that's a good school, quote unquote, and a bad school is one where the kids look different or the facilities aren't as nice. And so you're saying, I'm going to go ahead and solve this in India because I'll get some data, learning data, make it available to family. That was the idea.
Yes.
How'd it go?
So it was a complete and utter disaster. So I found this company that was called Gray Matters, and they had a really thoughtful, high quality assessment that was targeted at early grades. I basically bought a bunch of their assessments and was like, hey, let me just buy a bunch of your assessments and I'm going to run this test. And I found this tutoring center, this guy who ran a tutoring center in one of the worst slums in India in Mumbai called Baiganwadi. And he runs this tutoring center for very poor individuals there. And I was like, hey, let me use your tutoring center when you're not using it and just start offering kids to take this test here. And he was like, he was in on it. He said, okay, you can do it. So I spent a lot of time at a tutoring center, and we started recruiting, first recruiting the kids at the center itself and then getting them to tell their friends. And basically the idea was, here, pay me 5 rupees, which is not much money at all. It's less than, it's like 20 cents, and take this test. Give me, just to provide some cultural context, in India, people love tests.
In lots of the world, they love tests. Americans that are freaking out about tests, we just not even understand.
Yeah, anytime an Indian parent can find out the rank of their kid in anything. So I'm like, okay, 5 rupees so that people just show up, and all they do is they give me the information about what school they're at, what's their teacher, how much do they pay, and then have the kids take the test, and I'll do the rest. You come back in a few weeks once I run this test session, get the data, and I'll do the data analysis on the back end, and I'll give you your kids' results back to you so that you can see what he did well, what he didn't, or what she did well, what she didn't. And not only that, I'm going to hand you a report, an anonymized report of what the schools did in this scenario. So this was the brilliant idea.
So your idea, holy smokes, hold on a second. Like, behind this smoke screen, not a smoke screen, but I'll give you the individual tests and get some individual data. You're building your own private data. You're running your own No Child Left Behind. I will build a data set of all the schools because I will have captured their actual kids' performance, and then I'll be able to use that data in a way that schools can't frigging cheat on, and I'll be able to tell parents, hey, here's the real deal about all of the schools in Mumbai or this particular, area of Mumbai or something like that. That's what you were doing?
Yeah.
You were like
Yeah.
Literally, this is what George Bush and Ted Kennedy came together to do in 2000 was like, we'll create No Child Left Behind, and we will create transparent data for all families, not just on the average scores of each school, but the subgroups by race, by gender, by income level, by, special ed. And you are going to do that as a private company.
So isn't there a certain beauty to naivety? So the fact that I'd never been in education, I just thought like, hey, why is this not possible?
Oh my God. No, that's great. I love it. So anyway, all right, so you try to do this and then what happens? Do a lot of parents want your test?
I don't know. It was so... First of all, I was not the right person to do this. My language capability, I don't speak the local language, so right. I'm like trying to speak, so I'm speaking through translators, interpreters, and a lot is lost in translation. These kids had never taken a test on Scantron, so I'm spending so much time just trying to figure out the It was a logistical nightmare. Yes. I cannot tell you how logistically challenging this was. And then after all this, the data comes back and it's like, you don't have more than 7 kids at any one school.
Right. So
there's like no freaking data point. Like you needed somehow to get
like 100.
100x what I had in terms of data points in order to get any meaningful conclusion.
Right.
And I just gave up. I was just like, look, investing in a company like Zaya is a heck of a lot easier than doing this. And it did not work.
Yeah, it's totally fascinating. I have a glimpse of that through a different lens, which is the folks who do randomized control trial evaluations of, school networks like Bridge. The one way to do it is instead of charging people, you actually pay people. Because, you have a big, giant grant from like World Bank to study something really carefully, empirically. And you can hire, instead of like Arvind solo with, some dude on his own time in his tutoring center.
Yeah.
They have a whole giant team of evaluators and logistics people. And, they'll go in there and they'll pay people, all kinds of people to take the test from different schools, and they'll be able to put together their own private data set in the way that you wanted to do. But the amount of cash to get that going, to do one good high quality evaluation is often many millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And that's like in the developing world where dollars go a lot farther. So doing this as a one-man show is beautifully naive. I love it.
I still think there's a big opportunity, and I really do think there's a way to get better information on schools. Wouldn't it be awesome if we had some better version of a niche.com or a greatschools.org that had more information that allowed parents to feel like they understood what the experience of the school would be like?
Yes, that would be awesome. I wonder, I'm with you. There's probably a lot of tools that have to go in that. And one sort of vector of that is data. But in the US experience, parents want to know a lot of other things for sure. About school culture, about customer service. Like if I call, will the school call me back?
Yes.
Is it clean? Are people nice? Is there bullying?
Yes.
So that information, I agree, it's just very difficult to make those purchasing decisions.
Even more than just test scores. I mystery shop schools as competitors to schools I work with.
Yep.
And I remember this one thing that had never, I don't know, maybe this is a common practice, but it was the only time it's happened to me when I've been on a school tour. At the end of the school tour, the admissions person said, yes, you said your daughter was going to be in 3rd grade. And she opens her drawer of her desk and she pulls out, she's like, hey, this is, the last project that the 3rd grade class submitted. And it was essentially like a picture and then like a short story about that picture. It was the entire class's work. And it was honestly like kind of mind-blowing to me because I could flip through and just say, okay, this is how I could see their spelling errors. I can see like, here's how it was the best piece of content I'd ever gotten from a school. You usually get these brochures from schools that just tell you how many students there are, the facilities, like this inane information that's just totally packaged for your consumption.
Pure shtick, yes.
And this felt, even though I'm sure it was the best project or like more work had gone into this for the teacher, I'm not blind to the fact that this was probably their best foot forward. But the fact that it was all the kids in that class, it wasn't just one kid's work, and that I could see it for myself, it just was the best I'd ever been able to envision what my child would be around.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. Hey man, you've learned a lot about investing.
In another 20 years, I'll probably have checked all the boxes on what not to do and be ready to make some killer investments. The number of karate references makes me very afraid to get in any sort of engagement with your kids.
Yeah, my kids will just frickin' destroy you. They've been doing karate since they were little. They're like Marvel characters at this point.